means leading with technology. First is the power to achieve your true potential. First means putting people above all else. Today, we are growing across the region, and the best is yet to come. First Citizens, we put you first.
You're on mute, Mrs. Silva.
Sorry. Thank you and welcome back, everyone, to Day 4 of Governance Week 2024. As we now turn our attention to our third panel for today, and their topic is going to be surviving the third generation. Our focus and theme overall for Governance Week 2024 is regenerative capitalism, promoting exceptional governance for small states. And we've had 3 amazing days so far, but today I would say has been more than amazing. It's been exceptional with all of the discussions and starting with our opening presentation this morning by Eileen McGlynn from Curacao. Just before we move into our third panel discussion, I want to thank our sponsors again for Governance Week 2024. Our 2 gold sponsors, First Citizens Bank and the Massey Group, and our 5 bronze sponsors, Angostura Limited, Republic Bank Limited, the National Gas Company of Trinidad and Tobago, PwC, and J.A. Rowe and Sons Limited from Belize. Our 2 panels for today really helped us to turn our attention to family-owned businesses and SMEs. And now our third panel is going to look specifically at that issue of surviving the third generation. Now, actually, there was a note I was going to add just before, and I got distracted, but I want to read this as part of what our panelists should prepare for. And this was something that was shared at our panel this morning. And so just to set the context, right? This is something that's familiar to all of us. When asked, Sheikh Rashid, responding to the future of his country, said, "My grandfather rode a camel. My father rode a camel. I ride a Mercedes. My son rides a Land Rover. And my grandson is going to ride a Land Rover. But my great-grandson is going to ride a camel again." And this in the context of yet another quote, "Hard times create strong men. Strong men create easy times. Easy times create weak men. Weak men create difficult times. Many will not understand it, but you have to raise warriors, not parasites." That was part of our discussion earlier today, and it really is so instructive as we come to this third panel that's going to deal with this whole cycle of what happens in businesses and the culture we create among family members and the different generations. So I will start and I will introduce our moderator, Avia Marie Lindy, who will then introduce our panelists, the 3 panelists being Ria Manki Sukram from Trinidad and Tobago, Holek Rajkumar, also from here in Trinidad and Tobago, and Rochelle Cameron from Jamaica. So Avia, I will now introduce you and then hand over to you to introduce your panelists and begin the discussion. Avia Maria Lindy is a visionary leader and strategic business development specialist with over 25 years of experience. As the founder of Evolve Business Solutions, Inc., she excels in unlocking human capital's potential through leadership, mentorship, and coaching. In 2020, she launched her e-commerce lifestyle brand, Collection by Avia Maria. More recently, she collaborated with tech entrepreneur Eldon Marks, inventor of True Self Inc., to create Avi AI, an immersive, human-like conversational AI agent accessible via WhatsApp and the web. Balancing her professional life, Avia is a proud mother of 4 and advocates for a healthy lifestyle. Her mission is to transform lives and build a global community of 5,000 plus leaders who drive positive change worldwide. There's a lot more to learn about Avia. It's in the profile that was shared in the agenda with you today. But at this time, Avia, I would like to hand over to you to ask you to conduct this panel discussion for today.
Thank you very much, Kamala, for your kind introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to share this space with the amazing experts in the room to unpack a very important topic, which centers on surviving the third generation. I think today has been super amazing. And what I'm going to do is introduce our 3 panelists. They're very qualified and they are going to share amazing nuggets with you. But most of what you need to know about them is in there, the information that was shared. So I will just share a few nuggets so that you can get to know them a little better. So our first panelist is Ria Mankey Sukram, and she's an attorney at law, a family business and family wealth advisor, an author from Trinidad and Tobago, with expertise in corporate, family, trust, and estate law, and alternative dispute resolution. Ria provides legal succession governance and conflict management solutions tailored to family-owned businesses. She specializes in guiding these businesses through their legacy journey, as detailed in her book, The 7 Domains of Family Business, The Journey to Multi-Generational Legacy. And I should say that you should go to Amazon and get this book. That's a shameless plug. So Ria is also, she's very accomplished. She has a degree in mathematics and chemistry and law from the University of the West Indies. And she has certifications from Harvard Law, and she is an amazing, and she's qualified to speak to us today. So moving along, I am going to tell you a little about Holik Rajkumar. And Holik Rajkumar is the managing director of HRC Associates in Trinidad and Tobago, with over 40 years of experience in management consulting. Holik is the leading figure in executive search, compensation, and organization consulting in the English-speaking Caribbean. Before founding HRC Associates in 1990, he spent a decade with KPMG and PwC developing and leading their HR and organization consulting practices. He is a recognized thought leader and frequently leads workshops and seminars on related topics. He advises various boards in succession planning, talent retention, board and CEO recruitment, and executive compensation. His expertise also extends to assisting family businesses with leadership, succession, and governance improvements. So as you can hear, Holik is very accomplished and an industry expert, and he will be sharing a little later on. And our final panelist, Rochelle Camera. So Rochelle, I did some research on all of you, and there are a few things that I discovered about Rochelle, some fun facts. Apart from being the CEO of Prescient, I hope I got it correctly, Consulting Services, and she's a distinguished attorney at law with over 25 years of experience in the Jamaican bar, with a rich background in both public and private sectors. Rochelle has held C-suite roles in legal and regulatory affairs, human resources, and public relations. At Prescient Consulting Services, she leads a team dedicated to developing and executing business, legal, and people communication strategies. Something else that I discovered about Rochelle, she is a transformational leader and is referred to as the business doctor because she comes in, she as the go-to repairer of businesses. I'll conclude these introductions so that we can get right into unpacking how we can sustain generational wealth into the third generation. And to start the discussion, I'll invite Ria. You'll have 8 to 10 minutes to speak. We're going to manage time efficiently today. And those of you who are watching on YouTube, I want to thank you for joining us. And those of you who've endured or stayed on for the entire day, I want to commend you, because the race is not for the swift, but it's for those who endure to the end. So give yourself a round of applause for sticking around all day as we are in our final stage of today's Day 4 discussion. Ria, take it away.
Thank you, Avia. And as I kick off our panel discussion on surviving into the third generation for family businesses, I ask the question, what's the secret sauce? Especially when we have proverbs and premonitions from across the globe suggesting that the wealth amassed in the first generation is lost by the third. Kamla would have started with the proverb from the Middle East. And then there are other proverbs, from shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations, American proverb. First generation trader, second generation gentleman, third generation beggar, Spanish proverb. And we might even coin our own proverb today. So the theme of this year's Governance Week is regenerative capitalism. And this concept arises from the observation that everything in the universe is organized into interlinked systems that follow a natural flow of self-renewal and regenerative vitality, which can then be applied to creating a sustainable socioeconomic system. And the family business is just that, a system made up of 3 distinct yet interdependent subsystems: the family, the business, and the ownership groups, each with its own legitimate perspectives, goals, and dynamics. Now, the long-term success of a family business hinges on the functioning and mutual support of these subsystems. So regeneration in family businesses can be observed through their duration or life cycle stages, each presenting unique challenges, strategies, as well as governance structures that contribute to the success of the next generation. And the first stage is the business's inception. And that's often rooted in the founder's vision, his entrepreneurial instinct, as well as his disposition towards risk-taking. Now, the founder invests significant time, energy, and resources, typically relying on very informal structures and procedures. And I want to underscore at this point that it is important to recognize how the founder's traditional and even spiritual values influence the business, which then lays the foundation that becomes increasingly important with each successive generation. So after surviving the uncertain startup years, the family business enters a phase of expansion that is often characterized by a growth in sales, products, or employees. Now, the business retains this degree of informality, but there are more systems and structures that are established. This is the stage that also coincides with the founder's transition either to or through middle age. So key challenges would include managing this midlife transition, recognizing the independence of the next gen as they begin their careers, whether or not it is in the family business, and envisioning what the future ownership and leadership of the business may look like. At this stage, little seeds of ideas of ownership and leadership transitions come into play. I have to do my will. Who will lead the business? Do I have to safeguard my assets from divorce and creditors and spendthrift children? Would I want my children's partners to have access and ownership of my business or my wealth, or is it just for my bloodline heirs? So these types of questions start to take shape as the family's wealth grows. Now, this stage can also see multiple generations working together, fostering either a collaborative or a calamitous environment within the business. Now, at the beginning, I asked the question, what's the secret sauce? So recently, the family that owns the popular sauce doubles in Trinidad and Tobago faced an ordeal that led them to issue a public statement. And I would ask Laura to place the statement in the chat, please. So this family business is now in its 3rd generation, and it was started by their grandmother in the 1970s. And in this very short statement, the family actually provided some insights into their various structures. So the first insight relates to the natural life cycle that we are currently discussing, from coming into existence through their grandmother to an expansion phase where they have branches across Trinidad, and the grandchildren, the third generation, develop the traditional street food, converting it from street to shop, as they put it. The second insight is their succession structure, whereby each source establishment is owned either by a second or third generation, and everyone operates their own branch independently. The third insight is their governance and communication structures. So each branch is independently responsible for decision-making and governance, but communication takes place across all the branches to manage business-related and expansion issues in order to avoid any conflict from arising. And the final insight is in their value system, which I emphasized at the beginning. They began and concluded their notice with reflections on their core values. So at the outset, they stated that Sauce Doubles is a generational trademark originally established by their grandmother. And they ended with, from generation to generation, we continue to be committed to our family, employees, and customers. Even though they are now in their third generation and some 50 years have passed, the founder and her values continue to be recognized, employed, and serve as the foundation of the business. So this is just one of the multitude of ways in which families can establish their succession, governance, and communication structures in order to facilitate successful transitions into the next generation. So going back to our life cycle, we have our maturity stage, where the business has now established market success and focuses on maintaining profitability and market position. And this is the stage that requires innovation and adaptation to the changing dynamics. It's also at this point that the business faces a very critical juncture: embark on a path of regeneration or risk decline. And to see this regeneration in action, I go back to my original question. What's the secret sauce? And this time we're looking at soy sauce. So the Kikkoman brand has been owned by the Mogi family for 16 generations. So while known for sauces, Kikkoman's regenerative engine lies in pharmaceuticals. And they began researching yeast from the fermented soy and wheat and soy sauce, and opened a subsidiary of Kikkoman in order to monitor food safety and produce raw materials for clinical chemistry. So this demonstrates how innovation, diversification, and even acquisition and international expansion, which are common renewal strategies, can in fact sustain a family business over centuries. And how this is done is by fostering cross-generational cooperation and communication. But it requires a very purposeful and conscientious approach. And this stage often begins when the senior generation is in their 6th or 7th decade. And the key issues would include the older generation step away from the operating side of the business, and the generational shift in leadership and ownership that has now grown from a seed in the mind to a large tree of inevitable reality that will happen, whether or not we're prepared for it. Now, if renewal doesn't occur, the business may enter a decline phase. Now, the reality is a family business can experience a decline in any generation, whether due to poor leadership transitions, succession planning failures, inadequate or incomplete advice, health issues of owners, and so on. But here's the remarkable aspect of family businesses. Even though the family business may think they are in a decline, regeneration is still possible. For instance, a next generation family member might not wish to continue the legacy business, which of course can be a source of great heartache and heartbreak for the current owners. The next gen may have established their own professional careers or wish to create a business that more readily resonates with their own interests and skill sets. Now, this scenario creates a paradox. The same business that was built successfully and profitably by the current or past owners for the family and funded the next gen's lifestyle, education, career, personal goals is now seemingly left to decline. But this does not erode the legacy or diminish its significance. Because firstly, a suitable governance structure can in fact be set up to separate the ownership from the leadership. And that allows the next gen owners who may have their own livelihoods to still benefit from the ownership and the wealth of the business while entrusting the leadership and management to those with the relevant qualifications and experience. If the family decides to bring in a non-family successor CEO or appoint a board of directors or advisory board who are non-family members, then these individuals must understand the differences between a family business and a non-family business. They must recognize the uniqueness of that particular family business that they're working with, and they must seek to align themselves with the shared vision and value system, the shared purpose of the owning family. Now, the second way to regenerate, even in a decline, is through the creative use of family governance structures. And this allows for family involvement, even when some or all of the members do not wish to work in the business. So family members who lead the business can encourage those not involved to take charge of organizing family meetings, philanthropy on behalf of the family or the business, recording the family's history for future generations, or other areas of responsibilities not directly tied to the business operations. So their area could be the family part of the family business. And those that lead or work in the business are involved in the business part of the family business. And this approach really promotes a sense of involvement and contribution, even for those who don't work in the business. So it also helps to minimize the risk of conflict as both the family and the business grow. And the third scenario arises when the next gen chooses to create their own business rather than joining the legacy business. So while this new venture may be in its first generation, its foundation is that of the value system, the family name and reputation, the entrepreneurial orientation, the socio-emotional wealth of a multi-generational business, even if it offers completely different products or services from that of the legacy business. And this highlights the importance of passing on the entrepreneurial mindset to the next gen. And it can start within the family and the business systems, seeing mom and dad making business decisions, taking calculated risks or sometimes not so calculated risks, and the outcomes or consequences of that. Ultimately, we aren't creating a family business for a particular generation. We are fostering an enterprising, business-owning family. And this approach perpetuates the entrepreneurial spirit of the first generation, which then empowers the second, third, and future generations to evolve into a collaborative entrepreneurial culture. So successful transitions across generations begin with the enduring relevance of the founder, who embodies this character of perpetuity. And what I would have underscored earlier, the founder's values resonate within the company, influencing its direction and culture. And to illustrate this, I would like to reference a recent beautiful post shared on LinkedIn by Sean Rampersad of Rams Logistics, a family business in Trinidad and Tobago. And I would ask Laura to please share the link in the chat. And even though he was CEO for 6 years, he recently became CEO officially on LinkedIn. And his post was a heartfelt tribute to his father, who, along with his mother, built the company from the ground up. And he spoke about his father's humble beginning in Cunupia, in a village where poverty could easily overshadow dreams, right? He would rise before dawn, hitch his bison cart, cut sugarcane, and then head off to school. So the values dichotomy was either poverty can make you bitter, or it can make you empathetic and kind. And he summed up the value system of the business well when he spoke about the value system of his father. His kindness and gentle spirit have profoundly shaped how we operate at Ramps, always with consideration and respect for others. So it demonstrates that the values of the business are essentially the values of the founder, which can then help the family and the business into succeeding generations. The challenge lies in how those values are then passed on and how the legacy is stewarded to the next generation. So I will leave you with his father's advice. Don't try to be me. Make your own mistakes, learn and grow, Just don't burn the whole thing down. And it illustrates that there should be guidance and there should be a safe space to the next generation to forge their own path while respecting the foundation that is laid by the previous generation. And it's not about being stuck in the past. It's about striking that perfect balance between honoring the past and crafting the future within the evolving context of the family and the socio-economic climate. Thank you.
Ria, thank you so much. You have set the stage for a great discussion this afternoon, and you've laid the foundation, and you also asked a very thought-provoking question, what's the secret sauce? And you were able to build it out as you go along. So now I'll invite our second panelist to share his perspective on how surviving the third generation can be unpacked. Go ahead, take it away. Holly. You're muted, Holly. We're not hearing you. We're still not hearing you. Seems like we're having Murphy's Law, where whatever can go wrong will go wrong. We're not hearing you, Holly.
You're still on mute. Your mute is still on. So see if you're...
Could someone just send him a message in the chat? So
I think he's understanding that it's muted, that we're not hearing him, but I don't know that he's finding where...
You have to mute it on the screen, Mr. Rajkumar. So there's a mute button to the bottom left-hand side.
Yes, on your extreme left. Okay, I think he got it.
is he hearing us? It doesn't seem
I think
so.
you
Could
might
send
have to
him a message?
press back the mute on the other device now.
Great. Are you hearing me? I'm hearing you.
Yes.
Thank you very much. We're finally hearing you. So take it away. Let's hear.
Thanks, Javier. Thanks, Ria. I particularly enjoyed that. Shared sleeves to shared sleeves in 3 generations. So, you know, the theme today is surviving the third generation. Of course, Andrew Carnegie, you know, is credited with the aphorism that said the first generation starts the business, the second generation runs it, and the third generation ruins it. And we are talking about this, if you wish, this theme with a larger theme that is much more optimistic than that, because we're talking about regenerative capabilities. And certainly we are talking about the survivability of businesses beyond the third generation. So let's keep it positive. So, you know, when we look at the history of family businesses, of course, and particularly the family businesses in Trinidad, and I would think most of the family businesses in Trinidad are still around, are probably now in the third generation, migrating from second generation to third generation, which might apply to the grandchildren of the owner, who might be in the millennial gen cohort, that kind of thing. Very different social beings from grandfather. Grandfather started a business, pace setter, autocratic, visionary, creative, entrepreneur, hardworking with grandmother maybe at his side. The children grew up in the business. The 3 or 4 or 5 children grew up in the business. One of them would become second-gen CEO. And that second-gen CEO is supposed to take the business from granddad, from daddy and mommy, and grow it, sustain it. And I think I call this the resilience stage, because you're taking business that was started by an entrepreneur who had very different notions, or his own notions of how to run a business. He's an entrepreneur, right? He's worked hard, he's rolled up his sleeves, he's built a successful business, imbued with the values of him and his family and what he's learned through his traditions. He has developed relationships with community, with suppliers, with customers. He has worked hard, sometimes to the extent that he thinks that business is his life, and he works day and night to make sure the business is successful. He has children who might be interested in the business. They come from school, they work on evenings in the business, they grow up in the business. Some of those children might not have had the opportunity to go to tertiary level, to receive tertiary level education. They get straight in the business from school, and they continue the tradition when daddy retires or daddy unfortunately dies. That second generation's major job is to put resilience into the business that father has built and father and mommy has built. Has to build, if you wish, a better mousetrap, has to build a business that will last, has to build resilience in the business that father started. Father did not want too much formalities in the business that he started. He probably does not have or never wanted a formal board of directors or even an advisory board. He might quicker rely on trusted relationships with his ex-banker, or his ex-accountant, or his accountant, or a friend of the family, or the schoolmaster in the village might be a source of advice to him. So he builds this informal advisory board, if you want to call it that, or structure. He would not have formal systems and formal the formality of things like family charter or family councils. He might sit at the table, the lunch table, the family lunch table on a Sunday with the family and talk about business. But the business is successful because the entrepreneur has a bright idea and a great product and has a sense of service and a sense of community. Second generation comes in and has to continue, has to build resilience. And in many cases, we find that it's difficult sometimes, particularly if the father is still there, probably on the board, probably still the chairman, to exercise a certain sense of his own personality and independence. Father might be looking on and might be over his shoulder, might even want to interfere, and sometimes even want to sabotage. We've seen that where sometimes father steps in and says, son, I don't think you have the skills, let me help you. And sometimes that is tantamount to interference and retards the ability of the second generation to run the business. Building resilience at Gen 2 requires that the second generation chief executive officer takes the business to the next level, and that would require placing or putting in formal systems, instituting either a formal fiduciary board of directors or an advisory board, having formal systems of human resources management, right? Having formal systems of financial management and control. If you don't do those things we have seen, the business becomes very threatened, it goes nowhere, there's little or no development, the business gets into a stalemate situation and could enter a state of decline. Now, that is not true of many successful businesses, of course. It can be true of many successful businesses. And we have seen businesses where second generation has taken off to the extent that the businesses become significant national and international businesses. For example, Bermuda's comes to mind. Yeah, Bermuda's comes to mind, of course, Ansa Macal comes to mind. And there are many other businesses that we could think about that have taken off with under second generation. Unfortunately, there are many businesses that have floundered or failed under second generation. And of course, the typical reasons for that is, of course, leadership, nepotism. You might have selected the wrong second gen child or nephew to run the business. It might have, it might be related to problems of poor succession planning. There might be family conflict, poor governance. We talked about the lack of a proper board of directors or advisory board, lack of a family charter. That Vishnu talked a lot about the family values. How do we imbue the family values intergenerationally? And how do we retain the values of the founder owner that becomes legacy values that sustains the business and sustains the family? Of course, there might be significant macroeconomic and market changes that the business cannot respond to, the absence of strategic planning, unqualified family members. You might want all of second gen family members, brothers and sisters, cousins in the business, and they might not be qualified to hold the positions that they hold, and they might not be qualified to stay in the business or to hold positions in the business for which they have been promoted to or placed in. And of course, sometimes we have seen a particular business when I was with Pricewaterhouse 30 years ago, where you left it to a favorite son who went into a big project, went wrong, led to the total collapse of the business and the end of the family fortunes. If things go right, and the second gen CEO is thinking about the future of the business and the continuity of the business as a family business, and wants to have and to ensure that there is sufficient talent in Gen 3, right, from which he can choose, or he or she can choose the next chief executive officer. It requires what I would like to call a proper period and commitment to succession planning. And I call that getting the business in a state of readiness for the next leader, for the next third gen leader, the millennial leader. So second gen builds resilience, institutes the formalities that daddy did not need to have or did not wish to have, board of directors, financial planning and control, competitive analysis. What is important at this stage? At Gen 3, you might have 15 or 20 members of the family now. They have 3 brothers, 5 brothers, each have 3 children, many of whom might be competing for space in the family business. We always tell our clients, do not promise every member of the family that there's a place for them in the business. And Ria alluded to other things that could, other opportunities that could be discussed again through formal structures like the family charter and the family council for members of the family who might not be inclined or who might not be qualified to hold positions in the business. We talk about philanthropy, we talk about other businesses, or we talk about other interests, but not the core business. The core business, if there are no qualified family members to run the core business, you should therefore look at the outside outside recruitment, hire an external, someone external to the business who is qualified to run the business and who can serve as a mentor to the most qualified family member who is the family agrees should be the next chief executive officer. Now, succession planning, of course, in any business, and particularly a family business, does not take place overnight. If you have identified, second gen CEO, that in 5 years' time, I would wish to retire, and therefore we have identified which of the family members belonging to Gen 3 would be the appropriate chief executive officer, then a period of training should be pursued, and that period of training usually takes 3 to 5 years and requires a very programmatic approach, including the possibility of having the chief executive officer to be the crown prince, maybe spend a year or two in a formal business that might be associated in some way, either at a supplier or at some relationship organization, the bank that has developed a good relationship with the business and so on. It is useful to have the next gen, particularly the third generation, aspiring CEO, spend some time, 1 year, 2 years, maybe 3 years, in a formal established business, so that when he or she is appointed, he or she comes in with formal state-of-the-art business practices, business practice protocols. If you were to bring in the Gen 3 aspiring CEO to be into the business over a 5-year period, you would want that aspiring chief executive officer, the Gen 3 chief executive officer, to be involved in as many parts of the business as possible. And the closer you get to the anointment, right, where you would anoint him as the him or her as chief executive officer, you would want to make sure that you it's properly communicated. First of all, you place that person probably in a very demanding, difficult role to see how he or she performs and whether he or she is able to stand of to manage the intricacies and the difficulties that he or she will face when he or she is appointed chief executive officer. One of the things we always encourage second gen or first gen CEOs, departing CEOs to do is to bring in the next generation CEO through the business, appoint that person a year before as possibly chief operating officer, and about with a year to go, place that son or daughter on the board so that they could understand all of the pieces of governance and all of the pieces of the business. Once that third gen chief executive officer is appointed, I call this the third R. So we talk about resilience for the second gen chief executive officer. We talk about readiness, getting the third gen CEO to be through succession planning ready, so that when he or she takes over the business, he or she is equipped with all that is required. The third, if you wish, continuum, I call it branding. This is where the Gen X, or the third generation millennial CEO, has to take the business to the next stage of development, which is usually transformation, growth, diversification. Now, I think Ria also talked about dismantling. We're talking about regenerative capabilities, which might mean that the third generation CEO might have different ideas, of course, with the approval of the family and a solid board that's evidenced by solid analysis and so on. That diversification or getting out of the business altogether, getting into new areas of activity might be appropriate. And of course, this is what happens in business. Many of the great businesses that we see today did not start off where the businesses started off in a very modest way. And through transformation, growth, and through creative disruption, in a trumpeting way, emerged into the powerhouses that they are today. Importantly, while all of this is happening, and I think both the previous panel, including Christian and Vishnu, talked a lot about emotional intelligence. While all of this is happening, you cannot separate family from business. You have family council that is governed by a family charter. You have your board of directors, a solid board of directors or a solid board of advisors, right? And all of this is taking place in a milieu where there's tremendous family support, tremendous communication, right? There's always the need for counseling if that is required. And, Christian says every member, I think he suggested, every member of the family should be subject to some kind of emotional intelligence training and so on. But to avoid family conflict, communication is critically important. You will always have sibling rivalry. How do you deal with that? Very important. Family advisors are important in a context like that. And making sure that we can never, ever have every family member, because when you talk about intergenerationally, when you reach down to the third and fourth generation, you're talking about 50 or 40 or 50 aspirants to the throne. And of course, that's not possible. I want to end there.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. I was wondering. Yes, thank you.
I would like to end there. So thank you, Bert, for that. I probably overspoke, but that's okay. I love to overspeak sometimes. I don't have a voice to communicate that.
Yeah, what your presentation was very comprehensive. You took us through the pros and cons of third generation, ensuring that there's succession in third generations. But now we're going to invite Rochelle Cameron to share her perspective on this topic. Rochelle, at the top of the hour, we're hoping that we can have some discussions and also we can invite the audience to participate in the discussion. So over to you, Rochelle.
Thank you, Avia. So this is an interesting panel. There's not many times in my existence that I have not much to say, but Rhea and Halik did such a fantastic job of putting family businesses into perspective that I'll just add a few points to what has been delivered so far. So I'm coming to you from a Jamaican perspective, and just to shed a bit of historical context. We became independent in 1962. So what we are seeing is now, and I would like to call it an explosion of businesses, listed businesses, private businesses. We've had a lot of legislative changes. And what we're seeing in terms of family businesses is that we're seeing a lot of family businesses in their second generation. I saw this quote that wealth comes like a tortoise and it leaves like a gazelle. So one of the parts that I want to bring into this conversation is that the concept of wealth generation across generations is something that I've been advocating quite a bit. We do not teach our young people about money, and we do not teach our young people from a very basic level about running a business. We train lawyers, doctors, and a lot of chiefs. So one of the things that I have found in looking at family businesses, and over the weekend, I actually spoke to various second generation leaders of businesses in Jamaica and some of the issues that they're now contemplating. So we have a working world now where we have 5 generations in the workplace. We have the most educated set of in the workforce in the history of mankind, and the workforce is only going to become more educated. So we have traditionalists in the workplace, and the traditionalists tend to be the first generation leaders. So where we're seeing the first generation leaders is many have evolved into executive chairmen, but they are still pretty much, let me put it, at the helm of the business. They still have a bit of influence. The second generation leaders, we're seeing them between the baby boomer years and the Gen X. I'm very familiar with that Gen X group. So those three groups are groups that the concept of building wealth from nothing, that is what we were raised on. A particular set of value systems, we would have had less exposure to media, to the internet. We are the generation that are older than Google. I keep telling my young people, I am older than Google and YouTube. So when I speak to my Gen X leaders, they are struggling with a group of millennials and Gen Zs that I like to remind them we have raised. So because of the struggles that we had, we raised them to believe we can live our best lives. And a part of living our best lives is that they've looked at how we have built businesses and they're saying to themselves, that looks hard. That looks very hard, and we have not necessarily made it super attractive for the next generation. So in discussing with a lot of business owners, there are a couple of concepts, though, that remain true. At the end of the day, the value system, and both Rhea and Halleck mentioned it. What is the value system of the business? And I'd like to give JMMB as an example. So JMMB was started by Joan Duncan, and in fact, she passed away in her prime of establishing that business. And her twin daughter and son became co-managing directors. But the ethos of that business has remained through 2 generations, the ethos of love, even as they have expanded and they have grown. And as I was just looking deeper into the establishment of that business, there are a few things that they have done. They were able, one, to bring in both gender of children. And I find that a lot of businesses that are doing well have recognized that their women, their daughters, also have the capacity and capability to run the businesses. The flip side of that is, I just want to also throw in that birth rates are significantly down in the region. So we're having less of the 3rd generation to come into the workplace. So they had both genders of the children. They also went public at a prime time. So they went public, and the business is a public business, but it still has the significant influence of their founder as well as the 2nd generation. What they've also done is that they have allowed the 3rd generation to explore other professions and to work in other businesses, as Halleck has mentioned. And when I've looked across a lot of the businesses that have been able to now move into that 3rd generation, that is one of the things that they've done, is that they've allowed members of the family to take part in other businesses. As we say in Jamaica, sometimes you have to work for people so that you can understand and get a culture of work, because it still is, at the end of the day, a business. In other models, the concept of the family business has transcended through share ownership, where the head of the current business is not necessarily a family member, but the way that the share structure is set up, the family members still have significant positions on boards of the business, and they are able to influence the future of the business. But it is recognized that a particular CEO at the time, who may not be a family member, is the right person to lead the business. And I find there's a certain maturity in families that are able to recognize the transfer of wealth through other mechanisms than being the CEO and the COO. And Rhea would do a lot of that kind of structuring, of share structuring. Rhea also mentioned wills. I was working with a group recently that I was shocked to find out that the founder had no will. There is no will. And I was actually brought in for my legal expertise to convince that the way that we were going to pass this business through the generations is that the business needed to be able to be handed down outside of a courtroom. So there are some fundamentals, succession planning. And succession planning also has to recognize whether, when within the family we don't have a successor, because sometimes we have not created a natural successor. Sometimes we have not created that entrepreneurial spirit in the next generation because we've worked very hard as 1st generation to create a business that was able to educate. What we've had to is a lot of migration of the 2nd into 3rd generation, and they go overseas and they work for years and do not necessarily want to come back into the region. What I encourage my clients to do is allow them to go and work for someone, allow them to lead another organization and come back well equipped to lead yours, because just because they share the same last name does not mean that they're capable of running this business. So setting up an appropriate succession plan, governance as you would any other business. And what we recognize, those of us who work with family businesses, is that regular structures where we all go home in the evening, there is no Christmas dinner happening together, we don't have to gather together for christenings or anything, that it doesn't suffer from the substructure of that we are family, so we have to pretend to get along. So a family that I looked at over the weekend, they have a family council, as Holly and Rhea mentioned, but the family council, the heads of the family council, they actually each family group gets to elect one member to lead the family council. So there's a board of directors of the family council that mediates in family disputes. And when they describe some of the disputes in the family, but one of the things is that their founder had at core that this business needed to make it through the third generation. And it's in the DNA of the family members that we are going to make it into the third generation. So you find that the structures are put in place. So the succession, the governance, and sometimes the whole concept of going public. Because when I look across family businesses in Jamaica, those that have been able to, that are powering through into the third generation, have gone public. So because of that, there is a different scrutiny on the business, and the family members are reporting to shareholders, to a board of directors, that they now have to show that they are indeed worthy of holding roles like the CEO, the CMO, and they're able to bring in external persons to run the business. And finally, as I mentioned before, putting in the structures, not just for the transfer of business, but the transfer of wealth. Because sometimes the structure of the business is transferred in shares, so that becomes money that's able to start other businesses. And lastly, just as we're thinking of the concept of family businesses, sometimes we think of it only in terms of goods producing businesses or services producing businesses like hotels and so on. Law firms are family businesses that tend not to be able to transcend generations. Medical practices are businesses that tend to not transcend generations. So if we are able to educate our children of the next generations in such a way that they understand, even if they're a doctor or a lawyer, they understand business. And that's a failing in the region, that we are still not teaching about wealth creation. We still don't speak a money language. And certainly from a Jamaican perspective, we do not speak a language of wealth and a language of money. So that is something that is now evolving, and we are faced with a generation that we have equipped with a voice. We have said work-life balance matters, and I agree with them, it does. So we have to change the lingua that says to achieve work-life balance, we have to have some wealth generating. The more wealth, you'd be surprised what work-life balance you're able to generate. So those are my contributions.
Rochelle, that was absolutely amazing. You said you didn't have a lot to say, but I think whatever you said, it was quite poignant to the discussion. It also kind of tied in with what Rhea and Holly spoke about earlier. So now I'm going to we're going to have some cross discussions now. So I'm going to invite Rhea, because we started with her, to share, to respond to some of the scenarios shared by Holly and Rochelle.
Oh boy, and I made lots of notes. This discussion was amazing. So there's so many things I'd like to discuss, to bring up. But really, Hollick would have initially mentioned the exit style of the founder, where he's going to only exit due to death or incapacity. So he's going out with the crown on his head. And sometimes it can be challenging as to how to move that. How do we get a monarch, which is the type of exit style, to, let's say, an ambassador type of exit style, where they exit the operating side of the business, but they maintain a role as an advisor or mentor. And that in itself is a process. So as part of the succession plan, and this was touched on, that has to also include a CEO successor development plan. And as Christian had also mentioned from the previous panel, a good thing to include in that holistic succession plan to become responsible owners of family businesses is to perhaps have a personal development plan as well. I think that may encapsulate a larger succession plan. And also for Rochelle, I believe that there was honey bun recently, some time ago actually, on a panel. And I know that they are also part of the Jamaican Stock Exchange, Junior Stock Exchange. And I think the family business there it's active on the Junior Stock Exchange. And in terms of the wealth creation and losing the wealth, you're right. It's difficult to create the wealth. It can be challenging, but so very easy to lose it. And I've always said that financial literacy is something that should really be taught in schools. I myself wish that, I had that kind of foundation from primary school, secondary school, and not have to learn it while I had to experience it as an adult and trying to figure out, well, how do I budget? How do I save? How do I invest? It would have been so much more helpful to have that kind of conversation and education, in primary and secondary schools as well. But yes, I will leave it there for now, and as the conversation unfolds.
Ria, I totally agree with you. There was so much great content shared today. I took copious notes myself. But now I'm going to invite Holly to respond after listening to Rochelle. If you'd like to share some nuggets in response to what Rochelle shared.
Yeah, when we talk about family businesses, sometimes, and this is why I think it was so important that I came in at least to catch the panel before. And they talked a lot about the psychodynamics, And we talk about family businesses sometimes as if it is isolated from, if the business and the family are isolated from each other. It's not, right? It's not. And I know of a particular family business where, the family get together on a Sunday is critically important. They don't have family, formal family council, but whatever the magic is around the lunch table with granny and granddad, and we talk about the traditions and the values and the legacy that has made this business into the kind of business that you could tell stories about. That's very important. But I think Rochelle is right. We kind of sometimes forget that in all that we're doing and planning about family businesses, that some of the structures that are critically important, particularly structures relating to how you manage wealth, how you allocate wealth, how you distribute wealth amongst successive generations, intergenerationally. Those are very important themes for discussion, and those are very important subjects to avoid the internecine warfare, if I call it that, or certainly the intergenerational issues and conflicts, or even the sibling rivalries that occur if these things are not well described and not well articulated. We sometimes feel also that in family businesses, and we talked about intergenerationally, the crowd gets bigger and bigger and bigger. that everybody in the family business should have a place in the family business. Not everybody's interested in family business, but they might have, because of the structures, because of what's put in place, access to dividends, access to sharing the family wealth and so on. And this is very important, very, very important, that at some stage, whether it's second generation, third generation, or fourth generation, when the question of leadership comes up, and if the family business grows and expands and gets very intricate and complicated, we might not have a qualified family member to run our business. And there is no shame in not having a Brown run the legacy Brown family business. Bring in a qualified chief executive officer from the outside. Ford doesn't always have to have a Ford running Ford Motor Company. And let the family business perpetuate, grow, and become wealthy by having proper leadership, management, and custodian, whether that's a Ford or whether that's a Chrysler from the outside to run the family business. Okay, so there's no rule that says the family business must always be run by a member of the family. Okay, and when we do, for example, recruitment for talent for family businesses that from outside the family line, it doesn't always end up to be a happy situation. There is always conflict, particularly if the chairman of the board, for example, happens to be the family member, the founding member. There is always conflict. And there is always conflict, particularly with the favored son who didn't make it, who might still be on the board, who might still be in the business. We find that particularly in some of family businesses in Trinidad and Tobago that have not grown, right? We've seen a lot of family businesses, third generation, where there has been little or no growth and development. Yeah. So it is, you're right, it's very important that we have, and I like the JMMB story particularly, where the values of the founder who did not live a hell of a long time, but the values of the founder that is embedded in something called love, right, has created a DNA for that business that has seen it grow and develop significantly. So Rochelle, I like the JMMB story, and I like the story about our understanding of wealth and how we manage wealth and how we retain and grow and sustain the family business for generations to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Alec. I especially like the ethos of hope that Rochelle talked about. Now, I'd like to invite, our chat is getting very active. I'd like to invite to unmute yourself to speak. I have Derek, but before Derek comes online, Jacqueline Curell, I'd like to welcome you to the conversation. Is there something you'd like to add? You can come on camera and share your thoughts.
Okay, so she is, yes.
I'm having problem.
Go ahead, Jacqueline.
Go ahead, we can hear you.
All right, so as Jacqueline is ready, and maybe you can ask Derek.
She's coming.
Because she's still muted.
So while Jacqueline fixes her challenges, so Derek Lockhart has shared some thoughts in the chat. We'd like to hear from you. So we're having some engagement, interaction with our audience. So would you be kind enough to come on camera to share your contribution to this important discussion?
Certainly, thanks. And unfortunately, I'm exercising with my son, the work-life balance thing, despite the fact that my generation is much older. But this is first of all, the contributions by all panelists are amazing. Happy to see Mr. Rajkumar have a lot of regard and respect for him. Now, I have worked with five in family businesses. One of the companies at the time was a $1.5 billion US company, very, very large, thousands of employees. And the other one was his son of the first generation, work with him side by side. So both spectrums. Interestingly, in 3 of the 5 instances, it was the second generation who was eroding wealth, eroding value. The third, I think, were being set to intervene. And it was clear from where I sat that the systems, the approach that all panelists prescribed were absent. These were basically children who were spoiled. They were spoiled children and they're now spoiled adults. And unfortunately, they've been put in management and board to make the rest of our lives miserable. So those recommendations are solid. They clearly do work, because there are many examples of it. But having that, making sure that there's that planning, long-term planning, succession planning, I believe was mentioned, is key. And the other interesting point is that listening to the 3 panelists, it sounds almost easy. They articulated it so well. But having worked in these businesses, and I'm sure you all know this, it's incredibly messy, very difficult. The dynamics are beyond the typical workplace when you put the whole dimension of the family dynamics on an organization. So there's a significant amount of opportunity, and GMMB and others have demonstrated that it can be done. I mean, even the mighty Ansa McCall, the mighty Unicoma, despite their size, they are heavily rooted in a family structure. And those patriarchs and matriarchs would have had generational vision to set the stage and put things in place. Yeah, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Derica. You always give us a realistic standpoint as it relates to the topic. I want to invite our keynote who spoke earlier today, because MCB is in existence for 107 years. They have a substance story. And I would love to hear from, I think it's Islay McGlynn, if I pronounced her name correctly. I don't know if she's in a position to speak, but we'd love to hear from you, as this is our closing panel for the day.
Okay, and while we wait for her to unmute, we can quickly ask Rochelle. Oh, she has unmuted. So, okay, yes, Islay?
I'm here.
Islay.
Took me a minute.
Thank you.
No, thank you very much. It was a great panel, and Ria, I loved some of the points that you raised. I participated in I guess a webinar that was offered by a national newspaper in Canada, and it was talking about family businesses. And one of the points that the speaker made, which really resonated with me, is that at some point, family businesses will go from being a family business to a business family. And so that idea that at some point you need to bring in, so-called professional management, external management, to run the business, because either the family members don't have interest in staying in the business, or the talent base just isn't there, and the industry's evolved and you need to bring people in who have very specific skills. And that idea that when they become the business family, it's very much about how do they stay engaged in the business? What do they do if they sell it outright? What do they do with that money? And how do they reinvest that money potentially into philanthropy to support the community where the business started? And so it's just a really interesting perspective for me, having worked for a large organization and only really participating in a family business through being on the supervisory board. But it made me really think about how families evolve and how businesses grow and change, and where the responsibilities lie, I guess, and the opportunities ultimately lie. So Ria, some of what you talked about really resonated based on that session that I had participated in, about a month ago. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Ashley, for that comment. And yes, it really is an evolution to become an enterprising, entrepreneurial family, business owning family, as you know, as you put it. So it's not just a family-owned business. We are a family of entrepreneurs, for instance.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I actually also wanted to touch on Derek's point a bit. And when we are in the process of succession planning, one of the things that will naturally come up is this issue of boundaries. And boundaries are associated with identity within the family. Who is in and who is out, who is to benefit and who is not to benefit. And there's no right or wrong answer to it. It is challenging. And it really depends on the family. And typically a family will naturally and instinctively identify who is in and who is out. They will naturally and instinctively identify the boundary. But of course, you know, when the family grows and the business grows, in order to minimize conflict, it's better to establish and communicate what the boundaries are. And I think the boundary that Derek was referring to was more of an employment type of situation where, for instance, an employment policy where everyone will be hired based on their talent and no advantages are afforded to the family members, versus an employment policy that favors employing family members, whether or not they're qualified for the role, but only because they can be entrusted or trusted implicitly and maybe seen to be more committed to the long-term good of the business rather than non-family members who may be there for the remuneration only. So that really, you know, brings up the concept of, is it a family first type of business? Is it a business first type of business? But the more successful ones actually merge the two. So that I understand the challenges that Derek is facing. And yes, it sounds nice. It sounds very simple, you know, when we sit on the panel and we discuss it. But yes, it can be a challenge. Yes.
So, Ria, when you spoke about boundaries, I recall, I think it was Holly who mentioned that you do not promise persons in the business positions on the board. So there's no expectation. So I don't know if anyone wanted to, Rochelle, you wanted to jump in?
Sure. It's so funny, as we were discussing, a message just pop-up came on my phone, something with Usain Bolt. And what I actually thought, I said, only in family businesses do people think that without any level of training, we just naturally produce world-class athletes. So the fact that you're a world-class athlete does not mean that your children will be world-class athletes if they do not put in the work to become world-class athletes. And with family businesses, we think that there's this natural osmosis in becoming great leaders. So the other point that I wanted to make about that is, and on Hollick's point is, and I call it celebrating the second generation that's able to actually move into a third generation. Because the first generation that has that vision, that stick-it-to-itiveness, that will sit as executive chairman until they die because they are living that dream. To move that dream into a second generation with the policies, because the first generation wasn't necessarily given that responsibility. They were to establish the business. The second generation has to come in with the resilience, with a readiness from the first generation and putting the employment practices. So I'll give you a quick story. A second generation leader needs to fire his brother. Not performing, needs to fire his brother. So call the lawyers. I understand family businesses, and I'm like, how do you anticipate us wording this? And one of the things that they had just agreed to was an HR policy. And what they did is that they agreed it as a business, and they actually agreed it as a family, but not with the concept that somebody could actually get fired. And that particular termination, of course, to put it kindly, went into a kerfuffling, but when the dust settled, what it did was it allowed for movement through the family and removal in the family. Let me tell you, that took a lot of courage. It also meant that it caused a lot of family division. So as Derek says, as we are talking about these things in a very theoretical manner, in real life, families still have to live together. They still have to be there supporting each other. And and I think it was Halik mentioned and Rhea also mentioned, when you go back to the family businesses that stick to the core values, that they're able to remember those core values of what got us here and tell the stories of that first generation. But the magic is not just telling the story of the first generation that did it from barefoot up, but the second generation that got the benefit of the wealth and actually was able to multiply the wealth. And we do not tell the story of the second generation. We are like, we're supposed to, it is hard to maintain that second generation wealth and to be charged with the governance, to be charged with putting in the policies, the hiring practices. So I suggest too that in our discussions, we celebrate the second generation that is now charged with putting in the rigor around building a business for the third generation.
And this is why this thing I call everything that we charge the second generation to achieve is really resilience, yeah, because we have found that first generation really the true entrepreneur and that true entrepreneurial spirit has no time for formality. The board of directors have begged a lot of entrepreneurs, first generation owners, founders to have a board, even an advisory board, and they have shied away from it. Yeah. But the second generation must, in order to sustain the business and to build resilience, put in those formalities, all of the strictures and the formalities that daddy would have avoided in order to move the business and to make it resilient. Yeah. And it doesn't take away from what daddy's values are, or his philosophy is. It's a natural evolution, and if you don't do it, you might be out of it.
Thank you so much, Halik, for sharing those perspectives. I saw Kamala making lots of notes. So I'd like to invite you into the conversation. Because I know prior you were speaking about your children, and then in the panel before, Vishnu shared some brilliant best practices, things that he practically do. And his daughter is running a successful business that she has grown. So there are actual examples of or success stories that we can draw upon. So Kamala, let's hear from you.
Yes, and so I was making some notes that I'm going to add to my wrap up for today. But as I do have my daughter online, I want to repeat what I said earlier, which is this challenge sometimes is not easy at all, because as parents, we sometimes are so happy and feel so blessed because we have such amazing children. But then we also go through times when we are like, just exactly what have we done wrong, because the challenges are real, and that's all part of the dynamics, I think, of what happens with us as individuals. And I'm so happy we are discussing it to this level. Because when we talk about governance, there's usually this very intangible, vague concept that it's something outside of ourselves. But really and truly, ultimately, it comes down to us, our own emotional intelligence, the way we relate with each other, our behaviors. That is what develops the culture that then impacts what we have. And it's a very tangible thing. So I just have been so loving the discussions. So thank you, Avia, for giving me that opportunity to be able to share that as well. And I will give you the next few minutes now to allow you to invite your panelists to wrap up before we bring today to an official close.
So Kamala, thank you very much for your transparency. I saw Amber did comment that she's here. It's great that she's in the room. In fact, I have 4 children, 2 sons and 2 daughters, and two of them was actually listening the entire week to the governance because I involved them in everything. And even this session today was so useful for me because I have a startup. Many years ago when I started the business, I was thinking that all the children are doing different disciplines, studying this different disciplines. So I am building a conglomerate. That was my perception. But in actuality, many years later, when I came out of the C-suite and I've started a business, they don't actually want to be involved in the business. As actually one of my little son, who's a chemist, he was like, in order for him to take over, he will have to have the entire business. I have to pass it over to him so that he can run it probably the way he wants to. So it's so interesting and it's so important, and these discussions are so necessary that even when Russell remarked we do not teach our children, and I'm wondering why this is not on the curriculum about wealth generation and about entrepreneurship. And Vishnu made a very valid point because we are in an era where we're pushing entrepreneurial exploits, but people are not equipped to run a business or even to sustain a business the way that it should be. And most persons don't want to set up systems, or they don't even want to hear about governance. So I think it's so important for us to have these conversations. Ria, I really liked the models that you share. I'm following you on LinkedIn. I think it's brilliant. Holly, your experience of 4 decades has had tremendous value to this discourse, and Russia will bring in the Jamaica's perspective, and of course, including the going public and the junior stock exchange and how it has catapulted business was very, very useful. I'm now going to invite each of you to share your part in comments. And then I will hand the session back to Master Control to conclude today's session. And those of you who are still watching and want to make a comment or ask a question, feel free to use the chat. So let's start where we begun. Ria, what is the secret sauce?
Well, thank you very much for having me as part of this very engaging discussion. I can stay on for another hour and a half. But really sustaining the family business across generations requires strategic planning, a strong governance system, and that commitment to the core values. So the family business has to really embrace change and innovation to keep the business relevant and competitive, and establish the clear succession plans and the governance structures to facilitate that smooth ownership and leadership transitions. Maintain the communication, effective communication to address any potential conflicts, and always encourage the next gen to pursue their field, whether it is within the family business or through their own ventures. But you can find creative ways, as we discussed, to integrate their talents and interests. And finally, integrate the founders' values and principles and allow them to guide the business. We've been hearing that from the inception, from this morning. So yes.
Pretty much everything today aligned. So Holly, I'll give you a minute to share your closing remarks. You spoke a lot about resilience.
Ditto. It's everything has to do with how do you take it to the next stage of development. I mean, family businesses are the lifeblood of all our economies, right? It's literally 80% of all registered businesses in Trinidad. It's 30% of our GDP. It's 30% of our employment. When the oil and gas goes, we're going right back to family businesses. Family businesses contributed to 4.1% growth last year, while oil and gas and energy declined by 1.2%. So we are dependent for family businesses on our livelihood. Family businesses must take up the mantle and move to the next stage, as Ria said, of governance, putting in proper systems, making sure that we are resilient, making sure that we are adaptable, and making sure that we are making space for the next gen, the millennials, to take us into a different kind of trajectory. Very different from what Granddad might have started. Remember that we are not all entrepreneurs, but we have enough intelligence and intellect and enough resources to run strategically enlightening and successful businesses.
That was a brilliant summary. And Rochelle, you said welcomes like a turtle and leaves like a gazelle. Please share your closing remarks.
So we always have to remember that what got us here is not necessarily what is going to keep us here. If even as a family and a family-owned business, if we are not building on what we have, and if we're not willing to make the hard decisions for the growth and development of the business will fail. One of my young mentees became my mentees because his dad fired him. He was a recent graduate from an Ivy League university. He started working in his father's business, and his father fired him at the end of the first week. And he was devastated. And his father said if he went to some coaching with me, he would keep him on. And one of the things that came out of that is that he did not recognize that he was required to be an employee first and foremost to grow in the business. And that was such a great lesson for me, and that I have helped with other business leaders as they've thought about the next generation. And as we are thinking about moving wealth into the next generation, we have to be forward looking. We're in a technology era. The businesses of 20 years ago, the competition is completely changing. The landscape is changing. So we also have a great opportunity with the innovation coming out of these younger generations to harness them, bring them in early, and they are more likely to start a business than we were in my generation, because my generation learned how to work for people. So we also have a new generation that we can really harness their potential, their boldness, and their capabilities to work in this technological era to take businesses, family businesses, to the next level.
You could not have said it any better, Rochelle. I want to thank you all so very much for such a great panel discussion. I don't know where the time went, but we're out of time. I want to thank Vishnu for his sentiments he shared in the chat, and Derek for jumping in and sharing. And Isla, we want to thank you so much. We'd love to have more of you. I'm sure Pamela's going to have you back. Thank you all so very much. And I'm going to hand this session back to Master Control. Over to you, Pamela.
Thank you so much, Avia, Rochelle, Halik, and Ria. As we come to an end today, it is increasingly clear that we must actively seek to work on who we want to become. There's a powerful image that remained with me when Rochelle said that if you want to be world-class, you need to put in the work and train. You don't just be the son or daughter of Usain Bolt and become the next gold winner, right? So it does not come by osmosis, whether we are children of family business owners, whether we have now entered into organizations. We need to put in the rigor and the hard work. And so we must celebrate those who do so, whether they're from the first generation, the second generation, the third generation, or as we are seeing with some businesses, included the one that Isla shared with us this morning, and what Alistair shared earlier in the week. Even in the fourth generation, there are persons who are putting in the work, and we applaud them. We appreciate all of them. And they inspire us as we continue to aim for promoting exceptional governance for us here in our small nation states. And so I want to share, and I want to actually state this, none of our panel discussions are staged. We invite professionals who we think can add value, and then we allow them to prepare on the topic. So we intentionally do not prepare questions beforehand, because we encourage candid discussions. And I think today was truly a demonstration of how this works with excellence. I really and truly have appreciated today. Each of our three panels touched on important points that we all need to reflect on as we make choices in our organizations. So I want to say well done to all of them. And so I want to say a very sincere thank you. Panel one, our moderator, Carmel Hayes from Barbados, who took us through the pursuit of purpose with her panel, Simone Francois Whittier from Trinidad and Tobago, Jerome Palmer from Belize, and Stephen Patterson from Guyana. Then we went into our second panel, using emotional intelligence in SMEs and family businesses. Our moderator was Faye Lopez Colimo from here in Trinidad and Tobago. Our panelists were Dr. Vishnu Durga from Guyana, Sanyu Richards from the British Virgin Islands, and Christian Halut from Trinidad and Tobago. And we have just ended a really amazing discussion, panel 3, as we discussed surviving the third generation with our moderator, Avia Maria Lindy from Guyana, and her 3 panelists, Ria Manki Sukram and Holik Rajkumar from here in Trinidad and Tobago, and Rochelle Cameron from Jamaica. Our opening segment this morning with Isla McGlynn, chair of MCB in Curacao, was really, really instructive for the day. I was happy with the 4 success factors she shared with us that contributed to the bank's success. And these, she said, were strong corporate governance, clarity of vision, important partnerships, and effective leadership. What I really took away, most importantly, from her contribution this morning was how Maduro Cural Bank placed the values and purpose at the center of the bank, and how this has served them to have an organization that has succeeded past a century and hopefully will continue to be strong into another century. I would like to thank everyone who joined us on the live stream for this final panel as well. And also a very sincere thanks to our sponsors of Governance Week 2024. Our 2 gold sponsors, First Citizens Bank and the Massey Group, and our 5 bronze sponsors, Angostura Limited, Republic Bank Limited, the National Gas Company of Trinidad and Tobago, PwC, and GA Rowe and Sons Limited from Belize. A very, very special thank you as well to our CCGI support staff, Warren Anderson, who organizes and manages the live stream for us, Amelia Ragbir, who really does an excellent job in providing technical online support for Governance Week, and Laura Sinanan and Dana Marie Prasad, who also help us in managing the room. Tomorrow is our final day of Governance Week 2024. We will turn our attention to governance of groups and conglomerates. We begin at 11:30 a.m. with our opening presentation from Derek Rajak, CEO of Carrie Chris. And that I know is going to be an extremely interesting discussion as well. We will offer 2 panel discussions tomorrow. The first on ISO 37000, governance of organizations, and the second, value creation, sustainability, and long-term value for groups and conglomerates. We end tomorrow with looking at the future in a discussion with our chairman, Nigel Romano, and CCGI's Global Ambassador, Professor Bob Garrett. So as I bring today to an official end, I want to thank you all very much and wish you a wonderful evening. And tomorrow we come again for Governance Week 2024. Have a good evening now.
Thank you.